So welcome everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining us for some of our last few sessions of Ask a Trustee, which Sean Stack, VP of Insolvency here at Bromwich and Smith, has been so kind to put on for all of us. And it's really just an opportunity to give back to the community and just help people become more informed about finances, about debt, and really just to normalize this conversation. It's not a conversation we necessarily have on a regular basis, but it's one I know, Sean, you and I are pretty passionate about changing, and having people have this conversation a lot more. So Sean, like I said, is VP of Insolvency here at Bromwich and Smith, has been in the insolvency industry for 20 years. Sean's been featured on all the major, TV networks, has been in the news, has done all sorts of, webinars and sessions. Sean mentors and coaches other trustees, like as they're going into the trustee program as well. So, Sean, you're pretty passionate about education and empowerment. So welcome and thanks for being here, Sean, and welcome everybody else.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So up until now, we have covered topics like, how do I know I'm in trouble and I need help financially? We've talked about, what's the difference between credit counseling and something like a consumer proposal. We've talked in depth about what's a bankruptcy and how does that work? What's a consumer proposal? How does that work? And today we're just really building on each of these topics. I think today's topic is so great because I feel like, if anyone that's been following us along the way, and even if you haven't, I think you'll still appreciate this. But, I think we've built on the topics, to the point that we kind of come to a point where we can say, okay, I can figure out, where my finances are. I can figure out that I need some help. And I'm ready to accept that. I'm ready to accept the fact that maybe I need some help. And our topic today is, how do you go about choosing who that help, where that help is going to come from, who's the professional you want to see. And the meme I have up, it talks about, who are the recognized experts over time. If you look at the 80s, it was like the leading scientist. And, that was gospel. If the leading scientist said it, you were like, yep, that's who we want to follow, right? In the 90s, it's the PhD student that you would listen to. The 2000s, media was really seen as the expert, and that was obviously before anyone coined the term fake news. And then now, 2010 onward, it's our friends and family and their referrals and, sort of their reviews or, that kind of thing. And we're gonna start talking about some of that stuff today, which I'm super excited about. We've kind of gotten to the point where I'm gonna take like the medical analogy, being COVID, and I think it's one that we can easily relate to, right? That, I've got a toothache and I've had the toothache maybe for a while, it's maybe getting worse, and I recognize this whole, Ambisol at home or clove oil or whatever I was doing, it's not working. I got to reach out to somebody. But the question is, do I call 811? Do I go to my regular dentist? Is it an endodontist? Is it an orthodontist? Is it a, I don't know what dentist? I mean, I don't even know what all of the names are. So, I mean, who is it that I'm supposed to reach out to for help? Where do I go first? And that's really what we want to talk about today in terms of our finances, right? It's that same sort of situation that we're at that point where we're like, okay, I recognize, I've taken stock, I've looked at my budget, like we've talked about in other sessions, Sean. I've looked at, what I can do with the budget. I've come to this point where I know I need some help, but now the right professional for me. So let's talk about that. Let's just get that started a little bit. What's the first thing you want to say about trying to figure out who do I reach out to?
So, well, first off, it's a great analogy when we look at something like professionals in the community, and particularly something like the pandemic that we're facing right now. The reason why we've been able to maneuver through this as successfully as we have is we turn to the specialists within the community, and we take direction from them. And one of the difficulties is with specialists, of course, is that when you know one specialist and you know another specialist in the same field, sometimes they can have conflicting perspectives. And then you're still left in that same place of, well, who do I listen to? And it can be a difficult place. But the important thing to remember is, or to consider, is although you ultimately have to make the decision yourself, it's important that you understand what the relationship is that you have with that individual specialist, and of course that relationship with yourself. As you know, Taz, one of our values is about individual responsibility as a means to empowerment. And
Right.
that empowerment, I think we talked about this before, that empowerment comes from knowledge. And so one of the really important things is that we need to understand that relationship that you're going to be engaged in with that individual. Now, that doesn't mean you need to know their whole backstory and all of that, but it is very important that we understand the relationship that we are going to be engaged with them. So when we look at something like our financial services, sometimes what people will do is they'll say, well, absolutely, what you should be doing is you should be looking at, you should only be dealing with not-for-profits, right? Because a not-for-profit, they have your best interests at heart, and just use a registered charity. Now, it's a fair perspective to have, in the sense that it seems reasonable, but
Are you going to say not to use nonprofits?
well, no, I'm not saying don't use nonprofits and don't trust nonprofits. What I'm saying is that if you're in, if you need pants, right, and someone has shirts, and they're like, yeah, but this is for a nonprofit. Like, we're nonprofit. This shirt will serve you. You're still going to get arrested in public by walking around without any pants on, right? You will be caught with your pants down, so to speak. So what I'm driving at with that is, it's not so much, it's important to understand the relationship that you have, and it's also important to understand the service that is being provided in relation to that, in relation to that relationship. So for example, you'd mentioned earlier about you going for a toothache, okay?
Right.
When you have a toothache, certainly you're going to talk to your friends about it, right? Oh, my tooth's sore. Would you go to a bartender? Hey, I got a sore tooth. I'm not sure how to deal with this, right?
Yes, because alcohol cures everything, doesn't it?
It starts other things though too. But I mean, you could use that service, right? And it's like, oh, perfect, that's done. But is that really addressing it? And sometimes what we do is we will go towards a service, or we'll lean towards a relationship, because it seems like it's the easier, and I shouldn't say easier, it's a more sort of inviting quality to that relationship.
Right.
And that difficulty, that can really get us in a bad place. And that's why, the reason why I bring up the not-for-profit is, that's one of sort of the things that I would hear a lot in my career in the beginning was, well, listen, when I try to talk about this, I've been trying to normalize this conversation for debt for the last 20 years.
Right.
And so I'd say, hey, listen, I'd very much like to discuss insolvency and debt within the community. And people would say, yeah, but you're from a for-profit company. And
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd say, yes, I am. I'm a trustee. I am required to, what's important to understand when it comes to not-for-profit and for-profit corporations, this is just a structure, okay? It's so a trustee is unable to be a not-for-profit company. Like, you have to be a for-profit company when you're a trustee. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not for the community or for the client or for the individual. What it means is that's your corporate structure. So it's really important to understand that the service that's being provided can very much be tied in relationship to, or tied to the nature of the relationship. So you can't have a not-for-profit trustee. So the trustee that's going to help you kind of deal with your situation with your debts, with the pants, so to speak, right? They're not going to have that not-for-profit shirt on, they're going to have the, oh, I'm a for-profit company. Now, they're not going to go announce that because nobody announces that, if you follow me.
Yeah.
Right?
There seems to be a correlation, though, between nonprofit and non-biased, I guess. Like, I feel like that's kind of the feeling. I know when I was a mortgage broker, that's, I would recommend certain nonprofit places to go to. And the reason I used to recommend that is I felt that they are, they're nonprofit, so they're unbiased. It seems like they to go hand in hand, or we believe they go hand in hand somehow.
Well, and it's interesting. So, one might say, like, just to expound on that. So, a company that is for profit arguably would be biased towards profit, right? In order to get to, like, arguably, if you're saying, in order to get to profit, you need to cover costs.
Right.
There's absolutely, unequivocally, all non-for-profits are for covering their costs.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Like, they're always going to be covering their costs, and their focus is not to generate profit. But if they have extra money from their after covering costs, they're going to use that to pump it in to make their organization bigger to serve more people.
For sure.
It reminds me of kind of a funny story. I don't know if I ever told you this. It was my daughter Brenna. She's 14 now, and years ago. I work a lot, so Kyla, my wife, she was taking Sabina, who's my youngest. She had to go get her shots, and so she said, Kyla said to me, Sean, can you pick up Brenna at kindergarten? It was a half day, and so I'm, as you know, this can be a pretty stressful job. I'm in meetings with people all the time, and
Yeah.
so the last thing I wanted was to be late for my daughter. So I got
Sure.
there early, and then she doesn't come out. And then a couple of more parents, and they're milling about, and it seems later and later. And I'm kind of like, am I late here? Finally, she comes out, and she runs over, and she says, Papa, Papa. She was in French immersion, and she's got this piece of paper. And she says, my teacher said I have to give this to you. And the piece of paper says something along the lines of, the principal's a nightmare, and I'm quitting. Please call the Calgary Board of Education and do something about this. And this was from her teacher, who gave it to us, gave it to my daughter to give it to me. And she said, we're such bad students, my teacher's not going to teach us anymore. And of course, I'm totally like, what the heck, right?
Yeah.
This is my first experience picking her up at school. So I bring her home, and I drop her off because I have to get back to my office to, I have a meeting of creditors, and I hand this to Kyla. Anyway, at that night, I meet with Brenna, and every night when I put her to bed, we'd review what happened in our day. And so I asked her, how was her day? And she said, I feel really terrible because we're such bad kids. This teacher can't be here. And I said, well, actually, Bren, your teacher taught you a really valuable lesson.